Um, so this year the topic is about Bhagat Kabir Jeo. So in Bhagat Kabir Ji's life and teachings on the basis of Gurbani. So this is a very interesting topic because of, as we'll learn through Kabir Ji's life, Gurbani, we can get a lot of inspiration. We can get a lot of direction in life. And so let's try to learn a little bit more about it so we can learn ourselves. And then the best way to learn is actually to teach. So you guys are the ones that will actually be giving this information to the kids at the camp. So first we'll go over Bhagat Kabir Jeo. Now, why does it say Kabir Jeo? So Jeo is an extra term of respect above and beyond G. In Gurbani, whenever Kabirji's name is used in Gurbani, usually they use the word Jeo. That signifies a higher level of respect. So that's the same terminology that we'll use in the presentation, Bhagat Kabir Jeo. We'll talk about the importance and significance, the special status given to Bhagat Ji in Gurbani. It can also be helpful to learn the history, especially the history that is told through Gurbani about the life of Bhagat Kabir Jeo. This is especially relevant for learning the Sakhis that are based off of the shabads. And then we'll also go over life lessons, interpretation analysis of the shabads that are included as well. So first we have to understand, why did we choose this topic? What is the significance of Bhagat Kabir Jeo? So he is one of 15 Bhagats, which Bhagat means a devotee of God, from different parts of India. Now these Bhagats come from all different parts like Maharashtra, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Bengal, and not only from different places, but different times. And that's one of the greatness of Guru Granth Sahib Ji, that it's not just our Guru's Bani, it's also the Bani of so many different saints from different faith backgrounds. But despite being from different backgrounds, the reason it was included in Guru Granth Sahib Ji is because it's consistent with the teachings of Guru Granth Sahib Ji. And Guru Arjan Dev Ji made this decision on which Banis to include. So there were different pothis that Guruji had that included the Bani of Bhagat Kabir Ji. And also, if we study like the literature that's attributed to Bhagat Ji, there's a lot of his writings that are even outside of Guru Granth Sahib Ji. But none of those were included because only those that very specifically were consistent with the concepts in Guru Granth Sahib Ji, those were included, which were authentic Bani of Bhagat Kabir Jeo. So, and there's absolutely no difference between the Bhagat Bani and the Bani of the Gurus. It is all considered Turki Bani, which means straight from the source. All of the Bani has the same heading, Ik Oankar Sadgur Prasad, meaning this Bani comes from the one God, Ik Oankar, and it comes through the grace of the true Guru. Doesn't matter whose Bani it is, all of the Banis have this heading, and it comes from the same source. And Kabir Jeo spoke bravely against inequality, rituals, and hypocrisy. And he taught people to connect directly with God. So some historical context, which we'll get into also, is Bhagat Kabir Jeo lived in the state of what is now Uttar Pradesh, in the city of Varanasi, which in Gurbani is called Banaras. So that's considered the holiest city in Hinduism, where when it's time to die, like people will often go to the holy city. When it's time to perform certain rituals associated with life, they'll go to that city. The Ganges River runs through that city, which is considered sacred in Hinduism. So Kabir Jeo lived in that city, which is considered kind of like the spiritual capital within India. Kabir Jeo has about 500 shabads and sloks in Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji, which this is a special honor given to Bhagat Kabir Ji because it's the most of any devotee. And in Punjabi, we'd say Kabir Ji is a Shiromani Bhagat, meaning the greatest among the Bhagats. And another evidence of this that we see in Guru Granth Sahib Ji is Bhagat Kabir Jeo's Bani is often first, right after our Mahalle or Sade Guruan di Bani. So let's try to understand some context, because this will help us understand Bhagat Kabir Jeo's place within Sikhi. So he was born even before Guru Nanak Dev Ji, who is our first Guru, 70 years before Guru Nanak Dev Ji. And the details about his early life are unclear, However, the legend is that he was given up at birth. We don't know who Kabir Jeo's birth mother is or birth father is, but he was found in a lake and adopted and raised by Muslim weavers. In Punjabi, we would call weavers Julahe. So Julahe named Niru and Nima in, like we said, Varanasi. So he grew up in that family, but he received initiation into devotion to God, Bhakti, by Bhagat Ramanand Jeo, which Bhagat Ramanand Jeo is another Bhagat whose Bani is in Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji, and who actually initiated a lot of the Bhagats who are included in Gurbani, including Bhagat Ravidas Ji, Bhagat Pipa Ji, Bhagat Sadhna Ji. So Bhagat Ramanand Ji was he was the guru of so many different Bhagats in Guru Granth Sahib Ji, and he also lived in Varanasi. So Bhagat Kabir Ji was devoted to God from a very early age. But just like Gurbani tells us, to perfect our devotion and to really reach God, we need to receive the Gurmat. We need to adopt a guru. So, and for Bhagat Kabir Ji, the guru who initiated him onto the path of reciting God's name, like we were saying, is Bhagat Ramanand Ji. And what happened was Kabir Ji was thirsty for God, and he laid down on the steps of a temple because he knew that Bhagat Ramanand Ji walks through that temple path on the steps. And so Bhagat Ji encountered Kabir Ji and told him to rise up and recite the name of God. And Kabir Ji took this as his initiation. He heard the word that Kabir Ji recited to realize God was Ram. He heard the word Ram from the mouth of his guru, and he took that as his initiation onto the path of devotion. So Bhagat Kabir Ji, 70 years before Guru Nanak Dev Ji, exemplified the teachings of Sikhi. He lived a householder's life, a very simple life as a weaver. He supported his family and he recited the name of God. This was his spiritual practice. He constantly recited the name of God, even while weaving, while eating, while waking up. And he shared what he had with others. He was very generous. A lot of people would come to his home and he would feed them. He would share everything he had with others. At the same time, just like our gurus did, and a lot of the Bhagats and Gurbani did, he challenged the rituals and hypocrisy that many people had fallen into. So he knew the true path to God, and this knowledge made him aware of the false paths to God, where people are being scammed by those leaders of religion in the name of religion. And these didn't matter which religion, both Hindus and Muslims, Pandits, Mullahs, Ghazis, everybody, he challenged them, like, is this something that you're doing because you know like that this will lead to God, or you're doing it to earn a profit, or you're doing it for exploiting people's superstitions or blind beliefs? And he was admired by many. During his lifetime, he had many followers. And to this day, he has many followers, including, it's in our Guru Granth Sahib Ji, of course, but even there are people who follow the teachings of Bhagat Kabir Ji. But just like anybody who is on the path to God or walking the true path, he was also persecuted by both religious and political leaders. And one of the shabads that we're responsible for is based off of this. And so just to illustrate how he countered superstition, we'll give this a very brief example. So just as the city of Varanasi is considered holy in Hinduism, a close by town called Maghar is considered unholy. For example, whoever dies in the city of Maghar is considered they were reborn as a donkey, whereas anybody who dies in the holy city of Benares is supposed to be liberated from the cycle of birth and death. But to counter this superstition and blind belief, Bhagat Ji, at the very end of his life, moved to the nearby town of Maghar to show that it's devotion to God that is liberating and not the city that you live in. So this is, and the best way to understand Bhagat Kabir Jeo is through his Bani, which is revolutionary and eternally relevant. So let's go over some of the Sakhis. So you see this photo, this Shabad is that Shabad Manna Dige Tan Kahe Ko Darai. So what do we see here? So we see the Ganges River. We see the Pandits and the Mullahs who are gathered and they're witnessing Bhagat Kabir Ji. Now, why are they looking at Bhagat Kabir Ji, and why is Bhagat Kabir Ji sitting on the river? This we'll learn through the Shabad. So what happened during that time is the Hindu and Muslim religious leaders, so the Qazis and the Pandits, convinced the Sultan, the king of that time, which a little bit of history of India during the time of the Gurus and Kabir Ji. So During that time, the king of India was the Lodi family. So it was Sikandar Lodi. So the Pandits and the Qazis came to the Sultan, the king, and told him, this man is turning people against the traditional religions. And he's telling them that you guys are following superstition. And they told him that he's corrupting our religion. And the Sultan, who questioned Kabirji, Kabirji didn't change anything despite being in the presence of the king. He said that only God is the true king, and that is the only authority that I acknowledge. And so even the Sultan became angry at Bhagat Kabirji and gave the order, because Kabirji didn't, salute him as the true king. He would only salute God. He gave the order to throw him into the Ganges River. And this is what that shabad talks about. Gangosain Gehrin Kabir, Janjir Band Kar Khade Kabir. So it's saying that Janjir means chains. They put Kabir Jeo in chains and threw him into the very deep, Gahir Gambir, the very deep river of the Ganges. And in the Shabad, he emphasizes the power of devotion and the supremacy of the mind over the body. Kabirji says, Man na dege, tan kahe ko darai, charan kamal chit raya samai. So he's saying that my mind has not fallen, meaning you've tortured me, you've thrown me into the river, but my mind is unaffected. Why is Kabir Sahib's mind unaffected? Charan kamal chit raya samai. My mind is immersed. Samai means to be immersed in the lotus feet of God. So normally we think of, we have pain, we go through suffering because of the mind-body connection. Bhagat Kabirji's mind is in such a high spiritual state that he's no longer affected by what happens to his body. It's like, you threw my body into the river. My consciousness is unaffected. Why should my body be afraid? So, but the story is that Kabirji was thrown into the river, but God broke his chains. And he seated Kabirji on a deer skin. This is a miracle. Now, this is an important distinction. Bhagatji never claims authority that I did this miracle. He never says that because of my powers this happened, but he says that God made this happen because it is the nature of God to protect his devotees. We see this with Prahladji. We may notice the story of how God incarnated as the man lion to destroy Harnakash. We see this in many examples with our gurus. But God's nature is that he protects the true devotee of God. So the king threw Kabirji into the river, but God broke his chains and seated Kabirji on a deer skin. And he wrote the Shabad, Ganga ki lahar meri tutti janjeer. God made the waves of the Ganges River break the chains, Mrigshala par baithe Kabir. And Kabirji was comfortably seated on a deer skin. And Kabirji teaches us in this Shabad that God is our true friend and companion in every way. When everybody had left Kabirji, God supported Kabirji and saved him. So Kabirji says, Kehe Kabir ko sang nasa. Says Kabir, I have no friend or companion. Jal thal rakhan hai Raghunath. On the land and the water, the Lord is my true protector. So this Shabad is actually a Sakhi, which we can learn a lot from. So we went over all of the lines in the Shabad. So what happened is the king saw this and he was amazed, but people kept complaining against Bhagat Kabirji, which the king was not. So he saw this miracle that happened, but he still wasn't fully satisfied. And he gave another order for execution. This was Sikandar Lodi, the king of India at that time. And this Shabad is based off of that event. So he ordered an elephant to trample Bhagat Kabirji. So this is Kabirji himself with his own pen describes what happened. He says, Puja band pila kar dario. They tied my arms and threw me before an elephant. Hasti krop moond meh mario. And the person who was sitting on top of the elephant struck him on the head and infuriated him. So the elephant was angry. Hastapag ke chisa mare. But the elephant ran away trumpeting. Ya murat ke haum balehare. I am a sacrifice to this image of the Lord. So here Bhagat Kabirji is reading the mind of the elephant and what's going through the elephant's mind. The elephant is saying that I'm not going to run him over. He's the very image of the Lord. Like he's a devotee of the Lord and the Lord's image himself. And Kabirji says, Ahe mere Thakur tumra jon. O my Lord and Master, you are my strength. Kaji bakebo hasti tor. The Qazi shouted at the driver to drive the elephant on. So the Qazi is seeing all of this, that the elephant is refusing to trample Bhagat Kabirji, but he's instigating him, no, you have to do it. So he said, Re Mahavat tur daru kaat. O driver, I shall cut you into pieces. Ishe turavo kalo sat. Hit him and drive him on. But the elephant didn't move, and instead, Hasna Tore Taretyan, the elephant went into a state of meditation. Vankya Hriday Basay Bhagwan. And Kabirji knew that the elephant is in tune with God, whereas the Qazi himself, his heart had hardened so much against Bhagat Kabirji that he could not see Bhagat Kabirji's divinity. But this animal, this elephant, despite being in like a life form which we know, like through Gurbani, that the human life is the highest, but this elephant was able to recognize the status of Bhagat Kabirji, but this Qazi was not able to. But through the miracle of devotion, this elephant recognized Bhagat Kabirji's greatness. And Kabirji is kind of reading the elephant's mind. Kya aparad sant hai kina? This is what the elephant is thinking. What sin has this saint committed? Bandh port kunchar ko dinha. That you have made him into a bundle and thrown him before me. Kunchar port lala namaskar. So lifting up the bundle like a Bhagat Kabirji, the elephant bows before him. Buji nahi kaji andhyare. Because of his spiritual darkness, the Qazi couldn't understand this. Teen bar patiya par lina. 3 times they tried to do this. Man kathor ajhuna patina. But even then, the Qazi's hardened mind was not satisfied. And Kabirji gives all greatness to God. Kabirji doesn't take ownership of any miracle. Kabirji says, Kya hai Kabir, hamara Govind. Says Kabir, such is my Lord and Master, this is God's greatness. Chothe pad mein jan ki jin. The soul of his humble servant of the Bhagat dwells in the 4th state. So we won't go into too much detail about this, but the 4th state is the state beyond Maya, beyond all suffering, in which the person is liberated from the shackles of Maya. So the first 3 are within Maya, like Tamo, Rajo, Sato, and Chothe pad in Turiya. Kabirji says, my soul is in the highest spiritual state in which no misery, no torture can touch me. So this Sakhi illustrates Bhagat Kabirji's spiritual greatness, the elephant's wisdom in recognizing Bhagat Kabirji, and the Qazi's hard-heartedness in not being able to recognize Bhagat Kabirji's spiritual status. Okay, so these are 2 Sakhis which are in Gurbani and which illustrate that concept that from the beginning of time, it's the nature of God to protect his devotees. In Satjug, he protected through and Prahlad, and in Kaljug, all of the Bhagats, the Gurus. So now what we'll see is the next shabads that we'll go over are from Bhagatji, which highlight how to live, like spiritual wisdom, which is eternally relevant. So one of the shabads that's in our packet is Ramaya Gunigaya. So many of Kabirji's shabads emphasize devotion to God and his name. And a lot of the ways in which people were being exploited at that time by the religious leaders was through greed for heaven and fear of hell. They said that you should do this havan, you should do this shabad, so that your ancestors get rest, or that you get a special place in heaven, or you should donate this much money so that you don't get thrown into hell. So they were exploiting people's greed for heaven and fear of hell, and people were going away from the true path of God, which is devotion. And so in this Shabad, Kabirji emphasizes this. He says, Surg bas na bachye, darya na narak navas. And I neither desire heaven, nor am I afraid of hell. How do I spend my life? Ramaya Gungaya. Sing the glorious praises of God, Jante paye param nidhan, from whom the most excellent treasure is obtained. So if we want to do the things, like, for example, if we want the comfort of heaven, if we want to avoid the torture of hell, it's not through any ritual, it's through singing the praises of God. Somebody who's truly singing the praises of God, somebody who's reciting God's name doesn't have to worry about heaven or hell. And he also rejected the rituals that were being prescribed at that time, like going without food for several days, torturing the body, ritual bathing, as things that take us further away from God. Kabirji says, Kya jap, kya tap, sanjamo, kya brat, kya isnan. What is this hard penance or tap? What is this sanjam or such difficult arrangements? Bharat means fasting, ishnan, ritual bathings. What are all of these rituals in front of devotion to God? And we can relate this back to Japji Sahib. Think about how many times in Japji Sahib, Guru Nanak Dev Ji talks about the futility of ritual bathing, starting from the very first paragraph, Soche Soch na hovi, by bathing the body, we don't become pure. And in subsequent paragraphs, Tirat Tap Daya Dan, Jeko Pave Til Ka Man, meaning all of these things like donation to charity, donation to donation to the Brahmins, they bring very little honor. And whereas devotion to God is the true honor. It also teaches us important life lessons, which can only be truly known by somebody who's devoted to God. He says that no matter what happens in life, and life goes through many phases, success and wealth, or failure and adversity. He said, don't be affected by these. Don't let them upset your mental balance. If happiness and wealth comes, don't get attached to it. Because if you get attached to the happiness and wealth, inevitably tomorrow it's going to turn into failure and adversity. Because the very same thing that you're attached to can change. So that change will upset your mental balance. He said, and it's even if you do attain success and wealth, it's not going to give you true happiness. So why unnecessarily get lost in these? He says, remain neutral and devoted to God and his name. And Kabirji says, Sampa dekhna har kiya, bipat dekhna roy. Don't feel delighted at the sight of wealth and don't weep at the sign of suffering and adversity. As is wealth, so is adversity. Whatever the Lord proposes happens. So jo bhi hukam vich hunda, whatever happens according to God's will happens. And if we constantly upset our state of mind based off of what happens, we cannot be truly devoted to God. And this Shabad goes over all of these concepts. So the next Shabad is in the packet is Ramaya Hom Barik Tera. And this goes along with the teachings of Kabirji that we were talking about on how Kabirji talked about connecting with God, direct loving relationship with God through the teachings of the Guru. Not doing any rituals, not depending on any priest, but having this direct relationship. And Kabirji exemplifies this in his Bani. He says, Ramaya Hom Barak Tera. O Lord, I am your child. Kahe na khandis avgun mera. Why not destroy all of my sins? Right? So if we were to account for all of our sins, we wouldn't be able to account for them over so many lives, so many thousands of years. Kabirji says, I have become yours. I am your child. Why don't you destroy all of my sins? And he gives examples from worldly life that we can understand. So just as the mother forgives the sins of her son, even if he runs away in anger, she doesn't look at any of his sins. In this way, he appeals to God to forgive all of our sins. And he says that without God's name, it's not possible to be saved. So no matter how many rituals we do, no matter how much fasting we do, no matter how many holy places we visit, without God's name, nobody can cross the world ocean. He says, Chint pavan man paryo hamara, naam bina kaise utras para. This thought has entered my mind that without God's name, how can anybody be saved? So this exemplifies bhakti, devotion to God, having a relationship with God, not just as some person sitting in the clouds, not just as somebody who rewards or punishes, but considering him our very own, just like we consider our family, our mother and father our very own, just as that relationship between the mother and the son, just like that relationship, we should have that same level of relationship with God, considering him our very own. So another concept in Bhagat Kabir Ji's Bani, which comes up again and again in all of Gurbani also, is reciting God's name as the only way out of spiritual darkness and reincarnation. There's no other way that we can be saved other than through God's name. And Kabir Ji says this in black and white. He says, Jo pa rasna Ram na kehbo. as long as the tongue does not repeat or does not chant God's name, does not recite God's name, upjat binsat rovat rehvo. That person will continue to come, meaning upjana, binsat, go, robat, and crying out in pain. So endless incarnations will continue to cry out in pain until we come to this path of devotion of reciting God's name. And he says that social status and wealth really don't matter. All are equal. The only thing that really matters is devotion to God. Andhkar sukh kabe na soi hai. In the spiritual darkness, which is lack of God's name, no one can sleep in peace. Raja rank do mil roi hai. And the king and the beggar both weep and cry. And we can relate this back to the banis that we read regularly, right? So Gurbani constantly tells us that no amount of wealth will make us happy. In Sukhmani Sahib, we learn, Sagal Srisht ko Raja Dukhiya, right? So normally we would think the more wealth we have, the more power we have, the happier we'll be. But Gurbani reveals to us that the king is the most suffering person in the whole world. Sagal Srisht ko Raja Dukhiya. Nobody suffers like the king suffers, but doesn't matter if it's a king or a beggar. Har ka naam japat hoy sakya. The same rule applies to everybody. If they recite God's name, no matter what background they're from, no matter what profession they're from, they can attain peace of mind. And we look at Gurbani, that's the greatness of Gurbani. Bhagat Kabir Ji, as we learned, is from a weaver background. Bhagat Ravidas Ji is from the background where he would collect dead animals in the town. Bhagat Namdev Ji was a calico painter. So people, hardworking people who are considered low social status, they recited God's name and became saints of the highest order. This is the full shabad that illustrates this concept. So the shabad Jo Jan Le Khasam Ka Now. This shabad talks about keeping the company of devotees of God and admiring their habit of reciting God's name. So this is true in general life also, right? Whatever habit we want to adopt, psychologically, we should keep the company of those who already have that habit. Because our mind not only learns intellectually, it learns through observation, it learns through imitation. So if somebody has a good habit, we should keep their company so that we also absorb this habit. And Sangat and the things that we in our heart adore and respect influence our habits and state of mind. If we respect people who are successful or wealthy, we'll indirectly adopt those habits that lead to success and wealth. In the same way in devotion, if we adopt the company of those who are devoted, we'll slowly start to understand the peace that devotion can give and the importance of developing this habit. So Kabirji says, Jo jan le khasam ka now. Whoever takes the name of the Lord, of Qasam, of the Master, Tinke sad balihare jo. I am a baliharna means a sacrifice. I am a sacrifice to those humble beings who take the name of God. And Gurbani constantly tells us to do this. In Rara Sahib, we learn Pranavat Nanak Tinki Sarna, Jintu Nahi Visraya. Guruji says, I take this sharan or the sanctuary of those, Jintu Nahi Visraya, who never forget you. Why? What does this do when we have a constant remembrance of God's name? He says that those who constantly remember God become pure, nirmal. Their minds become pure and detached from maya or illusion, and they become very dear to his heart. And he's the dust of the feet of those who remember God. Kabirji also mentions in this shabad his profession and how while doing this work, his work of weaving clothes, he chants the glories of God. Kabirji says, Jat julaha matkatir, my jat or my caste is that of a weaver. Matkatir, I have patience in my mind. Sahaj sahaj gun rave kabir. And very, with such equipoise, with such ease, Kabirji sings the name of God, sings the glories of God while doing his daily life. And in doing so, he teaches us to do the same. And he teaches us to adopt this habit and keep the company of all those who already have this habit. Okay. This is the theme Shabad, which kind of summarizes Kabirji's spiritual teachings. Remember, we went over the history where the Sakhis, where Bhagat Kabirji was punished for taking a stand against rituals and showing people the way of God. And then we went over Bhagat Kabirji's spiritual teachings. If we had to summarize his teachings, it's to do Naam Simran, because that is the only way to happiness and liberation. And Kabirji says, Kabir har ka simran jo kare, so sukhiya sansar. Kabir, whoever meditates on God's name, he alone, this is an important distinction, he alone, nobody else is happy except for the one who meditates on God's name. He alone is happy in this world. It ut kate na dolai jis rakhe sirjanhar. One who is protected by the Creator shall never waver, here or there. And we see in Bhagat Kabirji's shabads that despite such torture, despite such humiliation, he never wavered. He stayed devoted to God, and God protected. Jis rakhe sirjanhar. That person, that devotee of God who the Creator himself protects, which Kabirji is a perfect example of. So, conclusion, Kabir Jeo is the perfect example of Gurmat, divine wisdom of the Guru. And keep in mind, this is 70 years before the physical birth of Guru Nanak Dev Ji. ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕਿਰਤ ਵੀ ਕੀਤੀ, he earned an honest living, ਨਾਮ ਵੀ ਜਪਿਆ, he recited God's name, ਵੰਡ ਕੇ ਵੀ ਛਕੇ, he shared all of his spiritual teachings, his food, wealth with all of the Sangat. He emphasized devotion to God and his name, rejected rituals, just like Japji Sahib, just like all of Gurbani. He emphasized equality and invited anyone who wanted to get closer to God, no matter what caste or social status. These teachings made him beloved by many, but also caused him to be persecuted. And by the grace of our gurus, Kabirji's teachings are accessible to us through his shabads and remain eternally relevant and inspirational. And so even almost 600 years after Kabir Jeo's physical demise, he's remembered through his Bani and has a very special place in Guru Granth Sahib.